Hello and welcome to the Secure Start podcast.
And I've been sort of powerfully reminded by various children that no matter the level of difficulty when they were living at home, and sometimes it's absolutely right that they don't live at home, but no matter the level of difficulty, there's still family, and there's still that very important bond that is there. But there is something about modelling the sorts of relationships that can be achieved and those experiences that can be had, so that even if it's not possible to have those at home, the children can develop a sense of what might be possible. She wanted to be very clear that the relationships that she experienced at the Mulberry Bush, she believes are the only reason that she is today able to be a mother. And she very much models the sorts of care and love, care and concern that she has for her children on the experiences she had with the staff team at the Mulberry Bush. And as from my family therapy experience, I also think there's something about the intensity of the sort of family dynamic which can be very challenging. So expecting all to be able to sort of work through in the intensity of that sort of familial dynamic, family relationship, I think is short-sighted, really. I do think the children who get placed at the Mulberry Bush tend to be those who are surrounded by the highest levels of anxiety and risk. And what we know of these children is a sort of, they don't fit the mold, if you like. A one-size-fits-all program doesn't work. We need creativity, we need innovation, we need to trust our staff, we need to ensure that they're trained and properly supported, and then we need to sort of really trust that they and encourage this sort of creativity and innovation. We've had lots of children placed at the Mulberry Bush for whom there have been too many placement breakdowns. So when I was a house manager, we had a girl placed with us when she was 7, and she'd had over 50 foster placement breakdowns before the age of 7. And fundamentally, I think it was unrealistic to expect her to give something that looked like that another go. She firmly believed it was her fault, that these things, she was unloved, unlovable, nobody could really look after her. So I think for her, it probably made absolute sense that she continued in residential care, whereas for other children, the opportunity to support them to develop an understanding of what's going on within the family, to work with family and reintegrate them, I think is also really important. There's a great opportunity there. Residential care as a placement of choice, I think, is really important. Fundamentally, the things that the children say are generally to do with the importance of relationships and the sort of love and care that they experience. Having ex-pupils come back and visit, there is still that sort of sense of belonging to that wider Mulberry Bush community.
Hello and welcome to the Secure Start podcast. I'm Colby Pearce, and joining me for this episode is a highly respected leader in the UK's therapeutic community sector. Before we begin the podcast, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I come to you from, the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and acknowledge the continuing connection the living Kaurna people feel to land, waters, culture and community. I'd also like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. My guest this episode is John Turberville. John is the Chief Executive Officer of the Mulberry Bush, a national charity dedicated to transforming the lives of people affected by trauma in their childhood. He leads the development and delivery of an integrated range of specialist therapeutic and educational services, with a focus on expanding the charity's range and reach and ensuring the highest standards across all services, guided by its 3 core values: collaborative working, a psychodynamic approach, and a reflective culture. John joined the Mulberry Bush in 1994 after a successful career in business in central London, bringing over 3 decades of experience in therapeutic practice with an MA in therapeutic childcare and a certificate in family therapy. Formerly the school director and chief operating officer, he became the CEO to further develop the charity's ability to link teaching, research, and practice, aiming to deliver the highest quality services and excellent outcomes. John is chair of the Community of Communities Advisory Group at the Royal College of Psychiatrists, supporting quality assurance and accreditation for therapeutic communities and therapeutic childcare settings in the UK and internationally, and is a therapeutic community specialist auditing therapeutic communities prisons. John is also trustee of the National Association of Special Schools and governor of a village primary school, reflecting his commitment to both specialist and mainstream leadership. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Lovely introduction. Nice to see you.
Yeah, well, and as I generally admit at this point in time, it'll come through lovely and smoothly with the wonders of me being able to go back and edit my little missteps as I was going through your bio.
Yeah, no problem at all. No problem at all.
Now it's a significant work history you have, and you're leading up a a very well-known and, dare I say, even somewhat famous organisation there in the Mulberry Bush. I'm wondering if we might begin by further to that bio, if you're just telling us a little bit about your journey to becoming the CEO of such a highly esteemed organisation.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks for reminding me of the sort of esteem in which it's held. I suppose whenever people say that, makes me feel slightly sort of intimidated, and I often think of the word of my sort of current role of being sort of stewarding it for a period of time, or I don't know, a custodian or something like that. But yeah, in terms of my journey to CEO, I mean, some of it's sort of covered in the bio, I suppose, but it's sort of interesting for me. I think my interest in this sort of field of work really started. It was actually triggered by a documentary I saw once on TV in my teens, which was to do with working with teenage young offenders and doing sort of outdoor education in the great outdoors, which was a great passion of mine in my sort of teenage years. And I think from quite an early age, I was quite a sort of fragile child, if you like, and my parents sort of discouraged me from going straight into this sort of work. They didn't really think probably that I would be resilient enough, which I often reflect on. And I ended up going into chartered surveying actually in the West End in London, and I worked for a big sort of professional firm for 5 or 6 years. But in that time, I worked with a charity in the East End of London called the Stepney Children's Fund, who looked after and worked with similar children who are those placed at the Mulberry Bush, really. And there was a guy who led it called Bob LaValliant, who was just one of these most incredible sort of inspirational leaders, really led from the heart. And so I was involved in running camps and weekends for mostly boys, but some girls from East End schools from really quite challenging, deprived backgrounds. And again, that sort of spiked my passion to do more in this sort of field. And then I was actually made redundant up in London, and ended up thinking, okay, this is a time to make a change in my career, to do really to follow my passion, I suppose, and my interest. And I looked around the country. I visited various sort of schools and settings, and actually ended up at the Mulberry Bush just to come and have a look. I was linked up with Richard Rollinson at the time, who was at that time the principal of the school. And when I visited, I suppose something just clicked for me. It It felt right. There was something about the place and the sense of community that I intuitively sort of understood. And so I started there as a volunteer, and then really sort of worked my way through the care side of the organisation. So I became a therapeutic childcare practitioner. Then I ran one of the houses for a period of time, probably, I don't know, about six or 7 years. One of the things looking back, I often think I'm terrible with dates. So I often forget the dates, but sort of 6 or 7 years. And in that time, that was when I did the MA in Therapeutic Childcare at Reading, which was an amazing course run by Adrian Ward and Lynette McMahon, and had a reflective group. And it was just inspiring, really. So yeah, really enjoyed that course, learned a huge amount, and realized that sort of my intuitive approach to the work, there was a sort of theoretical underpinning and background that it was important to learn. After that, I sort of carried on progressing through my role. So I became the head of residential therapy, which was a role at the time down at the school, and I was the first head of residential therapy who wasn't residential on the site. So prior to me, it was a residential post, and that it felt like we were sort of moving with the times to move beyond that. And then became the school director for about 10 years, a post which I really enjoyed. But at that time, we were really sort of challenged to grow the work of the charity. So at that time, it was the school, and the school working with the children and the families of the children placed at the school. And so the challenge really was to grow the work of the charity, and we developed some other services, which I'll go on maybe to talk about. But in doing so, we sort of reorganized the leadership structure and set up this post of sort of COO and COO, sorry, Chief Operating Officer, and a Chief Executive Officer. And so I became the COO at that time. And we really started to develop our sort of range of outreach services, working particularly with schools initially, and then with social care organisations. And then about 3 years ago, John Diamond retired, who was the current CEO, and I applied for that role. And that seemed to make sense in terms of sort of my personal progression through the charity, through the organisation. And I still felt and still feel hugely ambitious for the charity. And so the last 3 years as CEO have really been about sort of developing that role in the work of the charity more broadly.
You mentioned a couple of people in that, and thank you
Yeah,
for the breadth of that response. You mentioned Richard Rawlinson, who I've already had on the podcast.
you have.
Was back in the teens, might have been about podcast 14, I think, off the top of my head. And Adrian Ward, who's also been I haven't had him on the podcast, but he's been referenced by other people as having run or delivered a very highly thought of training in therapeutic childcare.
Yeah.
Richard Rawlinson's a great one for stories.
Yes.
I wonder whether I might spring on you whether you have a good little Richard Rawlinson story, or at least the impact that he has had on your development as a professional, and also as a professional within the Mulberry Bush organisation.
Yeah. So my wry smile is I've got sort of quite a few amusing stories. Maybe I'll tell you one of those as well. But
it's only the two of us, remember.
Thank you for reminding me of that. Yeah. I think, I mean, Richard has been key to my own sort of progress and development, and that partly was because when I started at the Mulberry Bush, actually it was undergoing quite a radical change, moving from dormitories upstairs and classrooms downstairs. So really everybody living on top of one another, so to speak, and building residential houses. And so moving, as it was termed at the time, moved to small group living. And because of that sort of program and my experience in surveying up in London, And I suppose I'd like to think maybe something about my approach to the work. Richard was really encouraging of me and got me involved quite early on at quite a high level in the organisation. I often look back and think that must have felt quite complicated to some, but it really was, it sort of did inspire me. And I often think of it when I think about newer people coming in and the sort of strengths, knowledge, and the qualities that they bring and trying to encourage those and sort of capitalize on those. So Rich was absolutely key to me feeling really authorized to have a voice and have a say in the charity. So that felt really, really important. And I think over that period of time, there was something about the way that Richard managed that period of change, which was sort of determined, focused, clear, but in some ways gentle as well. And I think that that feels important at the Mulberry Bush. That I suppose I always have in mind when we're managing periods of change that there are a group of very sort of vulnerable children placed in that setting, and so we need to manage everything really quite carefully. So I think over time, what Richard has really the one phrase that comes to mind actually that I've raised often in interviews when I've had interviews about career progression within the charity has been about the importance of thinking spaces. And I think although Richard will acknowledge that he never uses sort of one word when 100 would do, that 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 actually providing spaces to sort of think and reflect about things is really, really important. So I've always seen that that's one of the key things for me to remember in all my roles is to provide spaces to think.
Yeah.
My wry smile when you were asking the question was that when I was Richard's a singer. I don't know whether he sang for you on the podcast.
Next time.
From thinking back, I don't think he probably did, but and yeah, he loves a story. And when I was the house manager of I was house manager of Sunset House for a number of years. Rich often used to come in. And he used to always have a song to sing. And one of the songs he used to sing was it was called Love Potion Number 9, which is a very old song. And it just used to wind all the kids up, and we used to have to sort of usher him back out of the door to try and calm the place down again. But yeah, no, an amazing guy, lovely guy, and I still regularly meet with him. He's on our board of trustees still at the moment, so he still very much is an important sort of voice for me in terms of the sort of therapeutic community model and something important about the sort of heritage and legacy that we carry with us as we continue to develop the Mulberry Bush.
Yeah, yeah, he was. I absolutely loved interviewing him and hope to do so again soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of things that he said that have really stuck in my mind was about at the Mulberry Bush, children learn to live with others and with themselves
Yeah.
as well. And then the other one was, and this one came up actually really. I was doing some work recently, and it reminded me of what Richard said during the podcast, which was about, and I'm hoping I'm not going to butcher it, but it was, I can always edit it, of course. But it was, um, if children if children are not on your mind, they'll behave in a way that that puts them in your
In
mind.
your mind. Yeah.
And if they're neither, then they'll be out of their mind.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that really
I
it
think
captures so much. Mm.
I think Rich often is able, although he likes lots of words, he often finds these sort of phrases which do capture something very important.
Mm.
And I think one of the things that's been important to me over the last 3 years, these 3 years of CEO, and it's a Rich Rollinson phrase, has been about the importance of the equal importance of the business of treatment and the treatment of the business. And certainly it's been a key focus for me in the past. I think as a charity, it's been very focused on on the business of treatment, which of course is, why it exists and it's all important. But fundamentally, if you don't get the treatment of the business right, then you've got nothing. Um, and so there's something about that balance over the last 3 years, which I've been trying to ensure as we grow remains a little more equal, that we focus on the importance of the treatment of the business and make sure the business is solid and sound so that we can deliver high quality treatment. So Rich, yeah, he's great with words.
Indeed, he is. And while we're sticking with the topic of the business, the Mulberry Bush School, for those who know a little bit of its history, started off, as I recall, back in the 1940s with
True.
Mrs. Docker Drysdale and her husband, and she ran something of a nursery school at that time, and then it's kind of developed from there. It's what is it? Must be getting on towards 80 odd years that it's been operating in one
Abs-
form or another, and it's more than just a school now. And
yeah.
yeah, I'm interested to hear and how you would yeah, your summary of the work that the Mulberry Bush School does in each of its areas of endeavour.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, absolutely. And 1948 was when it was founded, down on the site that it's still on, down in Standlake, by Barbara Docker Drysdale and her husband Stephen. And in many ways, it's the work of the school that remains the source for all we do. So the sort of model of practice developed in the school, the way in which it was thought about and is thought about, remains of key importance to the growth of the charity. Um, and really what the school still very much runs, in many ways as it did, although we've sort of adapted and changed over time, modernized, and we always look to embrace new thoughts, new ideas, theories and practice to try and ensure that we remain at the sort of cutting edge of what's going on, and practice is evidence-based. But really, it's been about trying to adapt that sort of learning, that knowledge, or those sort of golden threads, if you like,
Mm.
for different settings. And so back in sort of 2011, 2012, we recognized that we needed to try and do more. And actually, the trustees were also sort of challenging us by saying, if you're good at what you do, then you should be reaching more children. You should be trying to do more. And at that time, there was a reduction in the behaviour support service for schools in Oxfordshire. And so we recruited one of the lead practitioners for that support service. And we set up this thing. It was a sort of working title which stuck at the beginning, it was just called MBOX, which just stood for Mulberry Bush, Oxfordshire. And what was interesting was that what schools were used to was having a sort of an expert come in and work with an individual so-called sort of problem child. And right from the beginning, we decided that's not what we were going to do. But what we would do was we would go in and we would observe that child in the sort of setting, and then we'd meet with the staff team, and the work would really be about sort of skilling the workforce, so about supporting the workforce in schools to work more effectively with the children with the level of challenge. And over time, that sort of model has grown. So that still is a sort of key focus. Certainly, schools locally across Oxfordshire, we have quite a team working there, but also nationally and a little bit internationally. But so that started off with schools, and at a similar sort of time, and as I said earlier, I'm not very good with dates, but a similar sort of time, we recognised that the training we were offering to our own staff, it was the time when government were asking staff to complete a level 3 qualification.
Mm.
And we just felt it was not training our staff to work with the sort of level of complexity of the children placed at the Mulberry Bush. And so we accredited a course with the University of the West of England. It's a level 5 qualification in therapeutic work with children and young people. And we've been running that ever since. So I forget the number of the recent cohort, but it's something like 19th or 20th cohort.
Mm.
So that's a 2-year qualification, and we require all of our staff to pass that level 5 qualification. So that's a sort of contractual obligation, and that has led to us also accepting external students onto that course. So that focused us, as well as working on schools, but working in sort of social care. And we've also had practitioners from fostering organisations placed on that course. And then over the years, that led to the writing of a level 4 qualification that we've been delivering in one of the local authorities down in the south of the country for the last 3 or 4 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's ongoing. And then more recently, that was then adapted for a youth custody setting in this country. So it was the first therapeutic secure setting for the country. So we've been delivering there. And then more recently, so that's our sort of outreach. So MBOX morphed into sort of what we called outreach. It became a national teaching school for a period of time when that was something that the government introduced. That became our outreach team, and we have about 11 or 12 staff working in our outreach team at the moment. And then back in 2018, we set up Mulberry Bush Consulting. So we recruited somebody who had been actually the program manager up at the Royal College of Psychiatrists of the network that I chair, the Community Communities. And so she has come on board to develop organisational consultancy for the Mulberry Bush. So our services have really developed over time. And then at a similar time, we took on another site over in Toddington that was an archive and study centre called Mulberry Bush Third Space. So the real sort of journey, I suppose, has been developing the range and reach of the charity across schools, social care, youth custody and prisons and probation. And really the next phase is looking to how we extend those things and add new specialist therapeutic services. So we remain ambitious. It feels like we're doing a lot more than we were, but there is a huge amount of need out there. And ultimately, we're a charity, here to deliver social purpose, and therefore are always looking to meet need. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a residential school at its heart. And I think in our pre-meet we mentioned briefly that I'd also had on the podcast Simon Benjamin, who had worked at the Mulberry Bush School, and you were undoubtedly there at that time. And I recall him also talking about his role, which was to provide outreach to the families while the young people were resident in the school, which coming from, my jurisdiction, we don't have here in South Australia, we don't have therapeutic communities like that. Well, there is one in Victoria, a neighbouring state that I am aware of. But tell us a little bit of the thinking behind that, about having that outreach to birth family.
Yeah, sure. So working with families just is such central importance really to the work going on down at the school. And I suppose from when I started, there was a connection obviously with families in the school, which was important. But in terms of sort of direct work, there was little going on. And what we started to think about at that time was that so these children were being placed at the Mulberry Bush school from all over the country, mostly from England, although we have children from sometimes from Wales and sometimes from Ireland. And it felt as if there was a sort of disproportionate burden of responsibility being placed on the shoulders of the children who were placed to deal with often patterns sometimes over generations of issues from their families. So that just, I suppose, in my mind, felt really it felt really unfair. And there is a reality that when children are placed, they carry their family with them, if you like. And if we are to try and support children back into family, it felt clear that the family also need to engage in some way and find a way of working to to perhaps make some changes or to understand some of the challenges a little differently so that they can live together at home. So the work of the work with families, it's now called the Therapies and Networks team. So for a time we had a therapy team and a family team, if you like.
Mm.
But the work with the families is of key importance, and it's not only with birth families, but also foster families and adoptive families. So the school has quite a number of adoptive family sort of breakdowns, so children placed from adoptive breakdowns. And actually, one of the most well-received sort of interventions, if you like, I'm not sure I like that word particularly, but one of the things that the team does is to provide sort of peer support groups.
Hmm.
I suppose very often our experience has been that the families feel um, quite shamed, I suppose, by the situation that they're in, quite isolated,
Mm.
often overly assessed, sort of assessed to death a bit. And so being alongside their peers and those that have been felt themselves to be in similar situations can feel very, very supportive and helpful.
Mm.
But over time, that team, the Therapies and Networks team, have they're constantly looking at different ways of supporting families. So sometimes it might be a sort of couples therapy, or it may be as one of the groups that that the family get involved in. We've also had residential family weekends where we bring a number of families in to live alongside one another in the school for a period of time, and we work with the parents and the siblings and the children. And there've been a couple of examples where, at the sort of family's request, we've put a team into the family home when the child goes home and work with them in their home setting to try and sort of shift something at home. So I suppose I hope what that sort of gives an image of is the the encouragement to innovate, I suppose, and come up with different ideas and think about, well, what could really help there. And I suppose the
Mm.
ambition behind all of this is about really trying to enact a step down provision. So really trying to support children back in to a stable home base.
Mm. Yeah. And I think, we what it says to me is that it's not the case of the children being sent off to the Mulberry Bush school and residential homes in order to be treated and returned to their family, be they foster family, adoptive family, or birth family, but rather it recognises that treating the child in isolation is not going to necessarily be the most effective way of achieving that outcome, as you said, of successfully reintegrating them back into that family environment from which they came.
Yeah,
And yeah, and it is a school, and schools have semesters and terms, and where do the children go on term breaks, on semester breaks?
sure. Yeah, so it is a school. It's interesting, isn't it? That yeah, it is a school. You're absolutely right. But often when I'm showing visitors around, I often feel like the name slightly misrepresents what it is
Mm.
because it is a school. So it has an education area, which certainly over here would be what most people would think of as a school. So it has classrooms and so
Mm.
on. But it also has residential houses where the children live evenings and weekends, and for some of them during the school holidays. And then it has the Therapists and Networks team, which have a group of
Mm.
therapists and family network practitioners working with the families. Um, but in terms of the where the children go, so there are sort of two sides to the service. So traditionally, the Mulberry Bush was a 38-week provision, so a term time only provision.
Mm.
Children went home, whatever home is, during the school holidays. And then in between those sort of school holidays, every third or fourth weekend, there was a family weekend, which felt like an important opportunity for the children to go and reconnect with home, but also an important opportunity for work between the school staff and the family. Um, back in 2018, we moved from being just 38 week to also having a 52-week service. So it
Mm,
has always been the case that there were a number of children who were referred who weren't able to be placed because they didn't have a family to return to. Oh,
mm,
well, maybe they didn't have a family to return to, or they weren't allowed to return to their family. There are a whole sort of host of individual circumstances there.
mm,
And so back in 2018, we set up our first 52-week house. And in fact, last year, we opened our second 52-week house. So we now have three 38-week houses, which look after up to 6 children each, and then two 52-week houses similarly, which
mm,
look after up to 6 children. Um, so the children, so that introduces a different complexity, I suppose, to the way that the setting runs. The 38-week children have they will return maybe to a foster family, to their adoptive family, or some to their birth family on those weekends home or school holidays. And for the 52-week children, some of them do have families that visit them or that they visit, and again, going back to the sort of step down model for those children in the 52-week service, our ambition still would be to support them back into family if that is possible.
yeah.
And that may be through our 38-week service, or it may be back into family.
Mm,
But there's a whole area of work going on trying to support that sort of step down model.
mm. It's interesting. It was something that is entirely foreign to me. So I never even thought to ask. So I've been aware of the Cotswold community for a number of years. I talk regularly to Patrick Tomlinson, who's something of a silent partner in this podcast. The notion of children going home from a however you think of it, it's a therapy, it's a residential care service. Going home to a family-based setting is just completely foreign to me in my jurisdiction here in Australia.
Okay.
So, when I interviewed John Whitwell on the podcast early on, he referred to the boys at the Cotswold community going home. To their families during some weekends and also term breaks, school
Yeah.
holidays, and that there were, as you say, there's some complexities around that. Suffice to say, I never really thought of the question until I'd spoken to John Whitwell, but I'm inspired by the idea that children can go back to a place where relationships have been ruptured, or where there's
Mm.
been concerns about the level of care that they are experiencing. Um, yeah,
Mm.
that could happen with a view to, amongst other things, support, as you
Yeah.
say, that step down to
Yeah.
a success, to, I guess, a safe and successful um, replacement or return to
Yeah.
that family environment.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I think I'm absolutely not saying that it's right or proper in all circumstances or all cases, but one of the things that I think we often forget, and I've been sort of powerfully reminded by various children, um, that no matter the level of difficulty when they were living at home, and sometimes it's absolutely right that they don't live at home, um, but no matter the level of difficulty, there's still family, and
Mm,
and there's still that very important bond that is there. Um, and so for many of the ex-pupils who come back have found ways to, if they haven't in their sort of younger lives reconnected with family or been back with family, they have found ways to connect.
mm,
And for many of them, they're continuing their sort of journey to try and understand what happened and why what happened. Um, and I think that's really important. I always remember a child I key worked talking to me who for me, it was an important part of my learning, really. And because of what happened to this young person, I really sort of vilified the parents. And I remember this young person saying to me one time after a few years, we were sitting playing a game, I think playing a game of Connect Four or something, and they just said, why does nobody ever ask me whether I love my dad?
Mm.
And I can remember my heart sort of sinking really and thinking, you know, we've missed something really important here. No matter all of these awful things that have happened, um, actually there's still a love there. And this young person wanted to talk about the good times they'd had together, and I don't know, dog walks and going to the
Mm.
park, and in equal measure, and so I think it's really important that we remember the importance of family, no matter those sort of earlier, very difficult circumstances. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is a real passion project of mine. I would say that all therapeutic endeavor is um, enhanced by and successful outcomes are um, made more likely in circumstances where the children where we've been able to achieve some level of relational repair, at least, and
Yeah.
connection with birth family. If you think about it, if the children remain, if their relationships with their primary attachment figures remain fragmented, damaged, disordered, however you want to talk about it, then um, why would they ever put themselves out there again to
Yeah, no,
to
absolutely.
subsequent carers, and we operate under a misapprehension, I think, in child protection jurisdictions, at least in the Western world that I'm aware of, that all these terrible things have happened in the family of origin, but the main therapeutic endeavor needs to be to create a new family or provide a new family for them where we can develop a new template for them. And I just think that that's misguided. It's not particularly understanding of the task that foster parents and other adults who come in to the frame to work with these children are faced with. The mere fact that these children find it really hard to trust again when trust has been lost or broken and the like. So, yeah, so
Yeah,
you're starting to imagine a little bit my enthusiasm when I heard things like, they go home, like they go,
yeah, yeah,
hopefully they go home for Christmas, like these
yeah.
important types of um, periods and events.
I think it's really important, and I suppose just hearing you you say those things made me think about some of the things the ex-pupils say when they come back, but which I can say a bit about. But also, it made me think about this. I think one of the real challenges in working in residential provision is um, where there is a family is this sort of competitive element which can come in is sort of who are the better family really, or
Mm,
you can get into sort of competing or providing something that's that within an organization like the Mulberry Bush you can afford and home can't afford. So
mm,
you actually sort of work against that sort of reintegration. But there is something about modeling the sorts of relationships that can be achieved and those experiences that can be had, so that even if it's not possible to have those at home, the children can develop a sense of what might be possible.
mm,
And it makes me think of an ex-pupil. So one of the fantastic things about our ex-pupils, we have an ex-pupils network and an ex-pupils advisory group, and each year we have an ex-pupils open day. And they're becoming more and more involved. And one of our ex-pupils, over this last year, we've had three different ex-pupils who've joined us on the sort of stage at events presenting. And one of the ex-pupils, who was actually in my house back in Sunset back in the day, was presenting alongside our outreach team to a group of 100 educators, school leaders, teachers, and so on. And what she wanted to say about her experience of the Mulberry Bush, so she's now in her 30s, she has 2 children, she's married. And what she wanted to say was for her, so she was at the school when she was between about 8 and 11, something like that, the age of 8 and 11. She wanted to be very clear that the relationships that she experienced at the Mulberry Bush, she believes are the only reason that she is today able to be a mother. And she very much models the sorts of care and love, care and concern that she has for her children on the experiences she had with the staff team at the Mulberry Bush. And of course, those sorts of things are enormously powerful, and so what you're saying is absolutely right, really, that there is something of central importance of modeling that, what might be possible for the children while they're placed at the Mulberry Bush, modeling those sorts of experiences, trying to be conscious and aware of not competing with family, but trying to nurture sort of meaningful relationships. And at the guts of, I suppose, all of the work that we do, it is all about sort of relational practice, the central importance of meaningful sort of interdependent type relationships and the opportunity to build those with people who are deeply mistrustful, often rightly so. It's interesting that one of the sort of we've got some sort of short videos that were taken of ex-pupils on the ex-pupils open day, and one of the children, and that's on YouTube, so I will use his name, so Chris, he talks about the impact of the Mulberry Bush on him. It's a really reflective piece, which is really fascinating, and I think there's something of the qualities of the environment that comes through often in how the ex-pupils present themselves. But he talks about it being a safe environment, and the importance of it being safe. And he talks about how sort of dysfunctional his home life was, and what he reflects on are his deep mistrust in all those around him. And he says within the video that it took him a couple of years to realise that the staff at the Mulberry Bush weren't just trying to make things worse. And he started to, he talks about it changing his view of people, of children, of adults, and of the world around him. And so there's something of that sort of process of change. So yeah, he often springs to mind, but I think it's a common feature of the children. They are deeply mistrustful because they do feel that they have been let down, I suppose, in the past, in their formative years. And so building trust and trusting relationships is hard. I think it is really hard. In some instances, the parents have had extremely challenging lives themselves, and in many ways were Mulberry Bush children themselves. And there's something about the sort of the cycles over generations that the families have had to contend with. Really difficult, challenging sort of stuff, and wanting some help to try and sort of interrupt that sort of cycle and establish change. I think for others, I struggle to think of a circumstance where they don't want the best, or they aren't trying to give of their best, I suppose. And very often, whatever has been done to try and help hasn't helped, and people are feeling let down by the authorities, by the professionals, and so they come to us often with a mistrust, I think, of, are we just another bunch of people who are going to sort of judge them, let them down? And so it really is important to try and help them feel a valued part of the team. They ultimately will almost always know the children better than anybody else. And so it's very important that we talk to them, we listen to them. And I suppose one of the A parent comes to mind actually as I'm saying that to you, who I worked with, um, who was feeling very challenged by something that we were talking about in the school in relation to their home life. Was quite upset about it, and I ended up going out to visit to try and sort of mediate a little bit between the work that the school were doing at the time. This was some years ago, and the family and the child. And I remember talking to this mother and saying, look, we might not be right either. You know, you may be right, we might be wrong, but there's something about holding on to this sort of notion, well, could this be true? You know, just the sense of there's a possibility that this different way of thinking about it might be true. And I think holding a space for that thought can allow different things to emerge and different ideas to to move forward. So um, I suppose I think that's often the situation is trying to get alongside parents to build um, trust, that we're not here to judge, we are here to try and help. The notion of, you know, could this be true? Is there a different way of thinking about this? Um,
Mm.
Feels, yeah, it just feels really important. And you know, as a parent myself, parenting is difficult.
Hmm.
It's not always easy, and
Mm.
well, it's rarely easy. I would say probably. I think parenting is difficult. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. I think what you talk about there in terms of people's feedback, particularly the young people who have been through the Mulberry Bush and their feedback, and I think is really powerful, and in some ways, um, hopefully challenges the narrative that residential care settings are really the option of last resort for
Mm.
um, for children and young people who can't safely be cared for at home, wherever home may be, or that that relationships have broken down to the point where they can't be at home for a period of time. And um, I'm wondering what your thoughts are, given your experience, but also the feedback of young people who have been through the
Mm.
Mulberry Bush program around this idea of residential homes being across the gamut of care options, the
Mm.
one of last resort.
What we often think about when we think about the children placed at the school, and I think it's very similar for many of the people that we work with in schools and social care settings, prisons from probation and youth custody, is um, generally those children, young people are struggling to function in a group. So whether that's a school group or a family group, um, and so part of the importance for me of residential care, places like the Mulberry Bush is if that's where the problems are, then that's where the work is. So the work is in groups,
Mm,
and ultimately in the wider world, we all have to function in groups, you know, in out in the community, and so I think that's really really important. And I suppose from my family therapy experience, I also think there's something about the intensity of the sort of family dynamic, which can be very challenging.
mm,
And so expecting all to be able to sort of work through in the intensity of that sort of familial dynamic, family relationship, I think is short-sighted, really. And so for me, the role um, of residential care is sort of cuts through that really. So you're in a group setting where there's a number of staff, it sort of dissipates slightly the intensity of that family dynamic, but you have an opportunity to recreate it in pockets or to work at it rather than it just being ever present in the daily life of the house. I suppose that takes me down the route also of certainly in the UK there's been a real move to much smaller numbers of children in placements and even solo placements. And fundamentally, I mean, I think there are a small number of children who, at times of crisis, probably need that, solo placement to sort of stabilize. But I
mm,
do firmly believe that a reintegration back into some sort of group setting feels really, really important. ultimately, it is where the work is,
Mm.
um, and so I absolutely believe it's got a central role to play in supporting uh, certainly those children who've really had a rough experience in family or really cannot struggle with that family dynamic. And maybe, I think it has a role to play for them throughout their childhood. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong at all with good quality residential provision for some children throughout their childhood. And certainly we've had lots of children placed at the Mulberry Bush for whom there've been too many placement breakdowns.
Hmm.
So when I was a house manager, we had a girl placed with us when she was 7, and she'd had over 50 foster placement breakdowns before the age of 7. Um, and fundamentally, I think it was unrealistic to expect her to give something that looked like that another go. I just don't see why, it will have been so entrenched that she firmly believed it was her fault that these
Mm.
things, she was unloved, unlovable, nobody could really look after her. So I think for her, it probably made absolute sense that she continued in residential care, whereas for other children, the
Mm.
opportunity to support them to develop an understanding of what's going on within the family, to work with family and reintegrate them, I think is also really important. There's a great opportunity there. So I think residential care as a placement of choice, I think is really important,
Mm.
really important. I suppose the other thing that comes to mind in this country, there's often a big thing about the residential care should be within a certain sort of geographical radius of family.
Hmm.
Um, I understand the argument, but my experience in the Mulberry Bush has been it depends how the family are looking to engage. And an example I often give is at one time we had a family a child placed with a family whose family was about 6 or 7 miles away from here.
Mm.
And then we also had a child placed whose family was about 250 miles away from here. And at that time, the family who was very local, they might as well have been on the other side of the world
Hmm.
in terms of their engagement and their willingness to sort of work with us. The family that were 250 miles away, if there was an issue and we wanted them to come down or they wanted them to, they were there within moments.
Mm.
Um, and so it is about the sort of emotional engagement and connection with the work rather than geographical distance also. So I think yeah, I think we misunderstand that often in this country. But yeah, certainly the role of residential provision, I think, is of central importance as a part of the picture.
I couldn't agree more. If I could summarize a couple of the really key points that you made, one of which is that when children have been hurt and these are my words now, but when children have been hurt in relationships with adults on whom they depend, um, yes, it would be um, in their interests at some point for them to have a different experience of care from an adult to that which
Mm,
they've had. And if they can have that different experience with their parent, if indeed it's a parent, we can change the dynamic of that relationship, then that I think is an even better outcome as well, though they may not be able to safely go back and live with their parent. The
yeah.
reality is that there is a not insignificant group of our children who find going into a family placement really confronting, triggering. In fact, they're
Mm,
not ready to go into a family environment. And so residential care as an early placement option, as a place to, as Richard says, help them to uh, live with each other and with themselves in a way. And you also talked about, providing examples of, again, I'm going to use my words a bit, but examples of what a safe and nurturing child to adult, adult to child relationship feels like,
mm,
without that
mm,
being um, kind of in the child's face, 24
yeah.
hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's that, which I think is incredibly important. So I do think of residential care as something, something that should be tried earlier rather than later. If you
Yeah.
really understand the children that we're talking about and the experiences that they've had. And I think part of, and while you're on the topic or on the run of trying to understand the children together better, then I think our authorities need to turn their mind to what harm is being done with this blind allegiance to the idea that a family-based placement is always and in all circumstances the superior option, such that you have these children who just go through placement breakdown after placement breakdown
Yeah.
after placement breakdown, and the harm that is done to children in those circumstances is incredible. And I'm in my day job, I'm a clinician. I've worked in this space for 30
Mm,
years, and it's horrifying to hear of people who
mm,
have had young people who've had more than 50. I have a young person that I see who's more than 50, but they're towards the end of their care journey, not 7 years
mm,
of age.
mm,
So, um, which children do you think really benefit from a residential care
mm.
placement like what is offered at the Mulberry Bush, but also more generally other therapeutic communities in the UK?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think certainly the children that come to the Mulberry Bush tend to be those that um, create the sort of highest levels of anxiety and risk in their local authority. So I do think we're at a point at the moment, really, and it does relate to cost. There's no escaping the fact that it's a high, it's a high cost option for local authorities. Um, but that, the children who are placed are those that create the sort of highest levels of anxiety and risk to
Mm,
those around them. And very often it's those for whom all other options have failed. Um, and I think that's one of the real challenges in this country is um, it feels wrong that everything else has to have failed before you get
mm,
placed. But I understand the sort of cost-based reality of that. So the children who come to the Mulberry Bush, yeah, sort of highly complex lives that have surrounded them. Um, and they are children who, as I sort of said earlier, have struggled to function in a group setting, either in education or in social care. But it's interesting that I've been involved in a couple of groups more recently looking with the Department for Education, but also up at the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory, who've done some research on children who find themselves on deprivation of liberty orders. So those are children for whom it's felt residential care can't look after them, but we have a full youth secure estate. And part of the research was around looking at the care principles for these children and do they have different needs
mm,
from those within residential care. And in the most recent group that I was talking, really what we were talking about was we don't necessarily believe that they do,
no.
but it is something about the capacity of those around them to manage the sort of risk and anxiety that's created by the complex lives in which they live. And so it is more to do with the need for adult staff support and staff training rather than different care needs. And fundamentally, also, then the regulator has a role there. And when you were asking the question, I was thinking about a child we had recently. So I do think the children who get placed at the Mulberry tend to be those who are surrounded by the highest levels of anxiety and risk.
I wouldn't want listeners to feel that, or think, sorry, that the children who you are serving there at the Mulberry Bush are different to,
Yeah.
in the sense of being lower risk, lower concern. Especially in consideration of some of the things I've mentioned, like going home for the holidays. being going home for
Yeah,
Christmas, that sort of thing.
yeah,
I think it speaks volumes that these are children about whom there is significant concern, significant
yeah.
worry, and yet you can continue to provide this service,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah,
in the pursuit of their recovery. It's remarkable. But sorry, I broke into you where you're talking really about you started to talk about staff attributes and the role of the regulator as well.
yeah. So I mean, I think in terms of staff capacity, staff sort of emotional resilience and capacity to work with risk and anxiety is really vital, and also for those sorts of children at those highest levels of who are surrounded by the most complex lives, if you like, and present um, the highest levels of sort of risk and anxiety. It's really important that staff maintain a capacity to feel able to sort of to innovate, to do things differently. So often for the children who are placed, many people have tried the same things over and over again and wondered why nothing has changed. Um, and so that I think there is a role for the regulator in terms of supporting innovation in the sector. I mean, it's interesting that sort of the whole issue of sort of standards, regulation and standards. Standards do lead to standardization, and what we know of these children is a sort of they don't fit the mold, if you like. A one
Mm,
size fits all program doesn't work. Um,
mm,
and certainly one of the groups that I was talking at up in London, I was referring to a child who was placed with us, who was with us for a couple of years, very challenging young person. Um, and at one of the inspection experiences, there was real focus on this individual and what was going on around them, the work that we were doing, the sort of the ways in which we were trying to innovate. And it was there was a high level of scrutiny, really, and it felt very uncomfortable. Um, and um, I won't go into all of the details of that, but it was a really difficult time. The
mm,
child then left when they were due to leave at the end of their placement, about 4 or 5 months later. And in the following 9 months, this young person had 9 placement breakdowns and ended up in a secure unit. Um, and I was saying at the group up in London, look, there's a key example here of somebody who we need providers to be really sort of creative and innovative
mm,
in finding ways of connecting and looking after, containing, um, developing meaningful relationships with the sort of young person that's so deeply mistrustful
mm,
and challenging,
mm,
and I think we're getting that wrong. I do think things are starting to get better. There's a sort of change in the narrative around it at the moment, and just the fact that we're having these conversations in these sort of high level groups gives
mm.
me some hope and faith that things are sort of moving forward and changing. Um, but we do, yeah, we need creativity, we need innovation, we need to trust our staff. We need to ensure that they're trained and properly supportive, and then we need to sort of really trust um, that and encourage this sort of creativity and innovation.
Yeah, and people who know me and know my career well know that until the middle of last year and for the previous 14 and a half years, I was very involved in the health practitioner regulation scheme here in Australia and with a particular focus on the psychology side of things and rose up to chair and deputy chair roles for Australia in the regulation of the
Mm,
psychology profession. Um, when I talk, what we know is that practitioners in many, if not most, or indeed if not all endeavours, find regulation and indeed regulators anxiety evoking.
mm,
And when I talk to people in the UK and they talk about Ofsted,
mm,
and these are providers, at the level of the managing director or the CEO. They're truly
mm,
um, terrified of
Yeah.
an Ofsted inspection, and in particular one that finds that their standards are low. And
Mm.
um, the problem we have, and I think this is perhaps a little bit related to your concern as well, is that if we have our children in this space do require us to be flexible and innovative and
Yeah.
reactive responsive. Yeah.
Yeah.
And um, anxiety is the enemy of
Yeah.
exploration. Anxiety is
Yeah.
the enemy of innovation. So it's almost like a case of no good deed goes unpunished. You know, we need regulation. Regulation is about keeping the public safe. In this case,
Mm.
you know,
Mm.
keeping vulnerable children safe.
Yeah.
But if it's at the expense of innovation, if it's at the expense of justified and justifiable risk taking, trying something
Mm.
new,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's one of those unintended consequences, but a consequence nonetheless that it
Mm. Mm.
actually can have a negative outcome for the services that we're trying to deliver.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, the phrase that comes to mind is that I think the sector for quite a long time felt like I remember seeing at a conference the phrase that the flogging will continue until morale improves, sort of,
Yes.
and I think that there is a sort of there has been a sense of that, and um, I suppose two things sprung to mind. I think you're absolutely right. I think anxiety and the sort of fear of inspection is deeply unhelpful. And one of the things that our research has sort of shown that's taken place at the charity has been about the sense of shame for children, the sort of children and families that come into our services or that we work with in the schools and all these other settings. There is a sort of endemic sort of sense of shame for them in the situations in which they find themselves. And I do wonder what there's something about the sort of the way in which sort of regulation and inspection has been managed, which is about sort of the shaming
Mm,
and the sort of role of sort of shame in the sector or shaming into improving. And I'm not convinced that that's helpful. And certainly within the staff team, we would be conscious all the time of not getting caught up in
mm,
shaming staff members, shaming families, shaming children. We really need to find a way forward from that. And I suppose the other thing that I think needs tackling somehow is the whole notion that if it's written down, then children are safer.
mm,
And one of the real worries and the challenges we have is that the increasing amounts of sort of bureaucracy that surround meeting the demands of regulation and inspection draws staff away from children and to sit in front of laptops. Um, and and that's difficult because I absolutely agree and accept there's a really important role for regulation. We
mhm,
need to know that children are safe. And I absolutely accept the importance of that and the role that the regulator has for the government ultimately in establishing safety of children. But
mm,
somehow we do need to um, we need to allow creativity. And the phrase, I think it was at a similar conference to that other comment, but there was a phrase that came up that somebody said, which I do wonder whether it's true, which is that you can regulate to get inadequate services to good, but to enable outstanding practice, you have to set creativity free. Uh,
mm,
and I like that sort of notion that somehow, yeah,
mm,
we need to know people are safe. We need to train people properly, and then we need to really, yes, allow creative practitioners to engage with children and to find, yeah, to set that creativity free. And I think that is true.
mm. Yeah, there was a saying that was used here, but indeed, including by our national chair of the Psychology Board of Australia, that lot about talking about light touch regulation.
Mm.
Regulation needs to be there, but it can't be getting in the way of the
Yeah.
work that we do.
I was going to say, I do think the most recent narrative from the current HMCR, St Martin Oliver, around if we get it right for the most vulnerable, we get it right for everybody, then, you know, I do think that's true. I
Yeah.
think it's a helpful
Mm,
narrative.
yeah. Um, there's so much I can talk to you about, John, and
Yeah.
your day is only beginning. Mine's closer to the end. Couple of things that I wondered. You've talked a little bit about what the children say about their experience of the Mulberry Bush. I'm wondering if
Mm.
there's just any other message you would like to share around that, around what your alumni group or other returning adults who've had experience of the Mulberry Bush are saying. And you've also talked about what, you know, the message that you would like to put out there to the world, the Mulberry Bush would like to
Mm.
put out there. And I'm just wondering if we kind of bring it to a close around either one or other or both of those two things, what the children
Yeah.
say and the voice that you want the Mulberry Bush to be projecting to the world.
Yeah, God, there's a big question. I suppose it it makes me think about I think fundamentally the things that the children say it are generally to do with the importance of relationships and the sort of
Mm.
love and care that they experienced. And um, it makes me think that we had a few years ago a lady called Sally Finch came back to visit, ex-pupil from 1948 to 1951, so right at the beginning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now lives in Christchurch, New Zealand. And one of the things that she said, and a number of others have said the same thing when they've come back to visit the school, has said, "God, this place is just completely different, but it's exactly the same."
Mm.
And so there's something about that, even though she didn't recognize almost anything of the buildings on the site, what resonated for her was the sort of experience of how people related to her, the sort of warmth, that sort of sense of community, the importance of relationships, the love, care, and concern that she witnessed. And I think that's what the ex-pupils would often refer to, even if their experience was tough at the time. And one of them, you know, there's a video on YouTube of the ex-pupils open day when one of the ex-pupils, it's her first visit back, and she talks about it having been tough, but it teaching her the sort of boundaries of life is the phrase that she uses, and says that it helped her a lot. So there is something about the, you know, it's interesting on the foundation degree. There's a phrase that we've often talked about, which is the phrase sort of growing up is tough at the Mulberry Bush, and that's whether you're a child, whether you're a member of staff, whether you're the CEO. There's still a sort of you're still learning. There's a sort of growing up process which is difficult. And I suppose the message for the world, if you like, the single most important thing I think is the importance of relationships,
Mm.
and all of the work that we do is really about that sort of relational practice and the importance and the the therapeutic with a small t, if you like, importance of relationships, getting alongside one another, understanding, really listening, not just hearing, sort of really listening and hearing what people are saying to us, um, and yes, developing relationships with people in that sense of community. And I think what emerges from that, and is so clear within the ex-pupils' comments, is that sense of belonging that they then experience. And um, having ex-pupils come back and visit, there is still that sort of sense of belonging to that wider Mulberry Bush community. And I think that's something that can be developed in other organizations, in other communities, in other settings, in other countries. So yes, that's, developing that sense of belonging is of central importance, really. And I think, I suppose, what emerges from that is a confidence, which one of the things I love to read when I read this sort of ex-pupils comments, that sense of confidence, which I think leads to that, a sense of agency in the world. So the young people, now adults, have a sense of confidence in their own agency in making decisions about the world in which they then inhabit.
Yeah, yeah. I have a little acronym that I use. It's just because I'm a little bit mischievous. I was lying in bed one Saturday morning, and because I love acronyms, and I was thinking of um, what would be a good acronym for the milieu of a place. That felt quality of a place, which I think
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
referencing. And as it turns out, there's a really obvious one, which is aura. So the milieu is also the aura of the place. The is the felt quality of a place or a person. It's
Mm.
aura. And aura stands for me in my writing, being accessible, understanding, responsive, and attuned. So uh, I love to talk about auras. Maybe that can be what happens in a different conversation between us. But just because it
Yeah, I know, I
sounds a
like
bit
that.
mischievous, a psychologist of my stature talking about auras. But anyway, it's been a fantastic conversation, John. I feel like we probably could have gone on for another hour or so, but thank you very much for agreeing to be part of the podcast.
Pleasure. Well, thank you very much. Lovely, lovely to talk with you.